Welcome to another episode of the Next Generation podcast. Today we have the amazing Max Krupp on with us. He is a former Green Beret who served 28 years in the U.S. Army and has since transitioned into his amazing ranching operation. He is the owner and operator of Halo K Cattle, a pasture-to-plate operation in Texas that focuses on reconnecting people with the origins of their food. Max specializes in grass-fed, grass-finished Angus beef and also offers custom grain-finished options to catering that Texas market. With a deep commitment to animal welfare and sustainable practices, Max is passionate about raising awareness to rural America and bridging the gap between urban consumers and agricultural producers. Max, welcome to the Next Generation.
Well, thank you very much, ma'am. Glad to be here.
Yes, awesome. Max, take it away. Tell everyone a little bit about who you are, your story, all the things. I know I just gave them a little blip, but
Yeah.
tell us more about who you are, what you do, and all the things.
No, that was pretty good. You did a pretty comprehensive job about explaining who I am and where I come from. But yeah, I'm essentially like a straddle between a first generation and like a third or fourth generation ranching operation. My father-in-law is kind of a one-man ranch, and so I kind of watched him a little bit. And then when I was getting towards the end of my military service, I decided I kind of wanted to do it too. So he's been a mentor of mine, but he kind of runs his own thing, and we do a couple things together, and I kind of do my own thing as well. So he's kind of a one-man ranch, and I like that kind of ethos and ethic, and that's kind of what kind of I do as well, although I do have neighbors and him and whomever helped me when I get into a jam. But yeah, I was essentially an Army guy for a long time. And when I knew I was going to eventually go into ranching when I retired, I wasn't quite sure when I was going to retire. So it was more about not an if, but when a when, but just kind of all the planets aligned. And I decided to kind of pull the trigger and get started and then start Halo K at that juncture.
That's awesome. Can you share a little bit more about just that decision to start Halo K, going from serving in the Army for 28 years and just that experience to you're like, okay, I'm kind of looking to slow life down a little bit and just looking for something different in retirement and that transition into Halo K, maybe a little bit more about your background in the Army and just different things like that, how it impacted what you're kind of doing today.
Yeah, so obviously I was in there a long time. I was an enlisted person, and then I became an officer. Excuse me. So I was an infantry officer, and this was all before September 11th, and that kind of all kicked off. And then I served overseas quite a bit, and then decided to go special forces, like you mentioned. And so I had a lot of opportunity to kind of be outside and kind of do all the things that you kind of see on the commercials that are, you know, quote cool or whatnot. And so I really enjoyed that. And then as I kind of rose through the ranks, you can only stay behind the buttstock of a rifle for so long until you kind of get pulled into the administrative realm and where you're kind of managing warriors instead of being a warrior yourself. Even you're like maybe 6 or 7 steps away from managing warriors. You're managing programs that manage things that manage warriors and war fighting. And so that was a little bit of a degradation in my kind of professional job satisfaction, if you will. And then for a bunch of different other factors, my family, the political climate, a couple other things, I just decided, I know I'm going to go and make this step. And so I might as well just, if I know I'm going to do it, the time is probably right to do it right now. Plus, another impetus of the whole thing was I wanted to get my kids into a more rural environment and really kind of, for lack of a better term, put down roots where they all go to the same school and have the same friends and live in the same house during all their formative years in junior high and high school and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of another trigger for me to want to kind of move to Young County, Texas, and kind of raise them there as well. And then obviously I needed some work to do. And so moved the family here, kind of built a house, acquired my own land, and I started building the herd before I actually physically retired. But then I've kind of started ranching, and so I'm a retiree, if you will, but pretty much work just as hard as I ever did, kind of day in and day out, now that I am, quote, retired.
I'm sure it's probably one of those things that, for your own sanity and maybe your wife's sanity as well, you really, really needed something to do. And ranching was a perfect option for you. Talk a little bit more about why ranching. Why did you decide to go into that as a person who is kind of adjacent, first generation and stuff like that? Why did you decide that, cattle herd is what I want to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess a couple different reasons. So, I grew up in El Paso, Texas. So, for those of you that are like geographically challenged, that's like the furthest western tip of Texas. So, I mean, I could basically ride my BMX bike to New Mexico or Old Mexico from where I grew up. And so there were kind of ranching families in that area, but because of the overall topography and landscape and kind of grass profile, the ranches were like enormous. There weren't a whole lot of like cow calf operators with a couple hundred acres around there, because you'd only be able to run one or two cows. So I had some dealings with people in that sphere, but it was just such a foreign concept. But I always kind of liked the romanticized aspect of being outside and working with cattle and kind of being your own boss and doing your own thing. So that was kind of the seed plant. And then, I went in the Army forever, and it was always kind of there. But then, I've been married for quite a while, and so I started deer hunting on my father-in-law's place, and I would kind of see what he was kind of doing. And basically he was the town accountant, and would go do his stuff in town, and then just drive 25 minutes to where his places were, and basically as a one-man show, fix fence, work cows, do this, farm wheat, yada yada. And so I just really was impressed by him doing that. And so I started helping him over the years and kind of learning the craft and the trade in that respect. And then I was like, yeah, I think after I kind of retire, this is something that I would like to do, and get a lot of satisfaction from it. And like you mentioned, if I don't really, I'm like a checklist guy. So I like, write stuff down, the day before. And it's like, I want to do X, Y, and Z tomorrow. Really, it's like A through Z. And so I get a lot of satisfaction of like actually, scratching things off said list. And what's funny is, I was much more successful at scratching things off my list when I was like in the Army. Now, if I have an A through Z list, I might do like A and Q, and then do like three things that weren't on the list, and then not do any of the other letters at all. And so, but I do like to stay busy, and I do like to kind of like work hard and be tired at the end of the day. And so at the closure of my Army career, it was a lot of bureaucracy. So you kind of would burn a lot of calories and move a lot of papers and do a lot of stuff and have a bunch of meetings, but you never really advanced the football. You'd kind of wake up the next day and it was the same jazz. And so at least, even if I don't have a very successful day on the ranch per se, which I rarely do, I rarely hit a home run on what I'm planning to do, but at least I can look back and be like, that was completed, or I did that. And I was the one guy that did that by myself. And if I had a bunch of hands, it would have taken me, maybe an hour, but it took me 3 days, and at least I did it. And so there's some satisfaction in that respect as well.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about like just the heart behind Halo K? Where'd you come up with the name? Where, like, what, just like the kind of the story of your guys' ranching operation?
Yeah, so the name's actually kind of a cool and funny story. At least I think it is. We'll see what you think. Um, so my last name is Krupp, Krupp. And so the K with the quarter circle over it became the brand when I started I bought heifers from my father-in-law, and then, started raising them up as pairs, and then retaining heifers and selling steers for direct beef sales. And so, I had my brand, and it was all cute. And I think I had just a couple stickers or whatever. And people were like, oh, that's a neat brand. And they said, is it Halo K? And I said, Well, yeah, but I guess I failed to explain it well. But in the Army, in a special forces companies, there's six special forces teams, which are 12-man teams, and each team has a special either infiltration technique or mission specific kind of task that they do. And, for instance, an infiltration technique would be like a mountaineering team, a scuba diving team. And everybody's a parachutist in special forces, but I was the team leader of a military free fall team, which is the very high altitude parachuting from like 25,000 feet, oxygen masks, night, all that jazz. But colloquially, it's called Halo, high altitude, low opening. And if you're on a Halo team, people kind of say like, "Oh, he's a Halo guy." So when I had the K and the brand and all that, everyone's like, "Oh, Halo K, like K for Krupp and Halo because you're a Halo guy." And I never really put that together, but then somebody kind of mentioned it and I just grabbed onto it and kind of Halo K was born.
That's awesome. I love it when like brands or just like ranches have such a cool story behind it. It's like that has meaning, that has heart behind it. It's not just like, "Oh, I was doodling one day and that
Yeah,
kind of looked cool and then I had to go to the brand registry and they said to move this one and then that's what we got and here we are." No, that's a really stinking cool story and I think it just is a testament to like not only your family but then also just like to your history and your past, like your past and your future kind of
right.
merging and the whole nine yards. So no,
Yeah, I
that's really
really
super
just,
cool.
yeah, I can't imagine it being called anything else. Like the thought of it being anything else would be just so foreign and weird. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Halo K from Jump Street, and it'll always kind of be Halo K. And I think it's for that kind of weird marriage of those two things that we just discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, starting Halo K and just like going into that transitioning out of the army
Yeah.
and out of a position that you were like a really high up officer and you were a decorated member and all of those things. And it's a transition to go back to not only civilian life, but then also go from being in those strategy meetings or different things like that every day to then operating a ranch full time.
Yeah,
Talk a little bit about that.
it was a kind of, at the tail end of my career, I was a large or a principal staff officer for the entire Texas military department, which is like 25,000 people. And so, like, under my direct employ, or as far as employees, both soldiers and civilians and airmen and some others, I mean, I basically had like 200, 300 people working directly for me through my subordinate leaders or whatnot. And so I didn't really produce anything except for decisions. I didn't really do anything. If something needed to get done, I'd call in this team of
Mm-hmm.
folks or experts or whatever, whoever's, works in that specific function, and they would go and do it. I'd review it, and then I might be the guy to pitch it to the general officers or whatever, but all the actual sausage making was done by others. And that's just the way it works in those kind of large, complex kind of organizations where you have a staff. And then fast forward, now there's nobody but me. Like, I'm the guy that does the fence. I'm the guy that does the accounting. I'm the guy that trailers the steers to the processor. I'm the guy that does spot welds when I break something. Like, it's just kind of me. And so, unless I get in a super jam, which it's probably a little bit of kind of a macho, what am I trying to say? Like, it's almost like a macho, I don't want to ask for help. And it's really a personality defect. But I really try not to ask for help unless I really, really need it. So when I ask somebody for help, it's pretty much like a 911, or I've been trying to do this for 6 hours and I just can't make it work. So now it's just kind of me against the world. And it's not the most efficient system, but I get a lot of personal gratification from, you know, I planted that field. I converted all that brush into a pasture land. I cleared this path so the cattle have access from this place to this place. So if anyone drives around my place, like, that was me. There wasn't a whole crew of people that came in here and like transformed it. It was like me. So I do get a lot of personal satisfaction from that, albeit it's a very slow go and not a very efficient system. And I would classify my work ethic as high, but my work quality as like average. So I mean, I'm sure if I brought people in there that were really knew what they were doing, this stuff would look pretty tight. But my stuff just looks kind of okay. Yeah.
Hey, you know what? If it keeps the cattle in, good enough some
That's
days.
what I
So,
say. I start off with designs where it's going to be aesthetic, and then at the end of the whole project, I'm like, I just want this to be quasi functional, and if it holds, and I'll live with it. Yeah,
and also I want to check it off of my to-do list. So let's just get it
100%.
done.
Like I got the pen. I'm like, let's put this to bed.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's hilarious. No, I fully agree with that. As a fellow list person myself, I don't feel very accomplished for the day if I don't get to check off a few things from that to-do list. And it is also an A to Z to-do list, but
Yeah,
there and probably half of that alphabet stays on the to-do list,
yeah,
and
just
it's
get
probably
pushed.
been there since January.
Yeah,
It'll get done one of these days,
yeah.
right?
One of these years. That's why you got to look at it. Yeah.
Yes, one of these years. We've got a lot of years ahead of us. It'll get done eventually. And you know what? If it's gotten pushed off this long, it's not that important anyway. So it's fine.
Sounds good. Yeah.
For sure. Can you talk a little bit more about just like the different approaches that you've taken in starting Halo K? So not only did you like start a ranching and cattle operation, but you had some really specific focuses within starting that, whether that be your direct to consumer business or just like different things like that. When you started in ranch and you're like, this is what I'm going to do, why did you decide to go that path? And then just kind of like, what are your focuses in Halo K?
Yeah. So that's interesting because, I started showing interest. My father-in-law was like, because he learned from his father-in-law
Mm-hmm.
40, 50 years ago. And he's like, Max, I've been doing stuff the same way for all this time. And I'd really like you to maybe help me start innovating and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, sure. I'm not like the guy that comes in on the first day and I'm like, I think we should, go 180 degrees this way and charge. But I started kind of kicking around. I think there's a good niche market for this direct beef sales, and there might be some opportunities for us to kind of explore that. And he was like, nah, I'm not interested. So I basically decided to just go the direct beef sales route, which, I don't feel like it's saturated, but I feel like it's getting a lot more popular, and I have a lot of quote competition, although I don't really consider my partners in the industry that do it as competition. I think that we kind of work in concert, just giving consumers another avenue to purchase beef the way that they would prefer if it's direct from a ranch or direct from a rancher. So, and I've kind of worked a little bit with A&M AgriLife Extension, actually speaking at some of their educational things as like a panel member and stuff. And my wife is like, why are you basically like telling everyone like the tricks to your trade or whatever? And I'm like, it's a big country, it's a big state, it's a big consumer base. And I'm kind of a believer that like rising tides raise all ships. And so I'm not trying to, and plus I don't have any like magical formula. I'm not like the Elon Musk of direct beef sales. I don't know. I basically don't know what I'm doing. So, I just try to give them some lessons learned and try to make them successful, because if that can keep them in agriculture, I think that's a net win. So, yeah, so I decided to go the direct beef sales route, and I do some other things too. And then the other two things that I'd really try and anchor to is I try to stick with that one man ranch kind of ethic. You know what I mean? And I'm not doing this to besmirch anybody that has a large operation and a bunch of help or whatever. I think that's great. But like I'm small and I'm going to always kind of be small. There's a lot of barriers to entry. And so the cattle that I provide that people put on their plate, I'm involved from conception to consumption. And so that animal, I'm the custodian of its welfare its entire life. And I try to give it a really good life, which brings me to my final kind of anchor point, which is animal welfare. You know what I mean? I really do everything in my power. And sometimes, it doesn't always go the way you'd like, but like I try to always give that animal the best quality of life, use gentle handling techniques, and really don't do anything terribly unnatural. So I don't really fiddle with them if they don't need to be fiddled with. And I try to basically like the cattle that I see every day at the home place, and then I make the milk run and check all my other kind of places. But cows basically just kind of look at me as like another, fixture. Like, oh, here he is again. You know what I mean? Like they'll come up to me and
Mm-hmm.
if they see me coming or whatever. And so there's not that, that fight or flight kind of response or anything like that. I'm not saying that's prevalent, but like they just look at me as like another person in the ecosystem. And I try to, when I work them, I don't really use cattle prods or any of that kind of stuff. Not saying that that's a bad thing, and I'm not processing the amount of cattle that other people do. But I gotta put hands on them, 2, maybe 3 times a year. So I want them to have, for as best I can, a good experience. So they'll maintain a low stress level, know that I'm not out there to kind of make their life uncomfortable. And then subsequent times when I have to do it, it's a lot easier for me too. And so, all my animals are relatively docile. And if I do have just a random outlier that's just a wild guy or a wild woman, I'll probably just get rid of them because it's dangerous for me as a one man show. And then, I don't want a bad apple to kind of, infect my whole bunch. So I like all my girls to be chill. And so if I have just a total rebel in there, I might be like, yeah, you're not going to last. You might work for somebody else, but might not work for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Psycho ones are going to the sale barn. Sorry, you're
100%.
out.
Yeah. Bulls especially. But that is a super rare, almost infinitesimal occurrence. I mean, it almost never has happened, but when it does, I usually give them it's kind of a 2 strikes you're out. It's like 1, you kind of act the fool. I'm like, all right, maybe you're just having a bad day. We get it done. And then the second time when they do it, I was like, okay, you got to go. So.
Yes, exactly. I don't care if you're a good mom. If you hurt me, you don't get fed.
Yeah,
So
100%.
one of those things.
And plus,
Yeah,
I
for
need
sure.
to move you. Like nothing is worse than it's like I got to move 25 pair from this place to this place, and you have that one lone mom that's like, "Oh no, not going to happen today, not going to happen tomorrow," and so it's like I got to manage 2 places with 24 pair and 1 pair of this other crazy lady. I'm like, I don't need that in my life. Yeah.
Exactly, for sure. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but you really focus on that like education of the consumer, and also like as a ranching operation, you do a great job in articulating it in your story of like, this is the way I do it. Some people might not do it this way. And there is just so much like, I think I've talked about it in previous podcasts. There's so much like separation within agriculture of like these direct to consumer ranches and operations are getting really popular, and a lot of people are doing them, and I love that because there is a market for it out there. There is a market of consumers that really push for that, but you really focus on not only like the direct to consumer, but really just educating your consumers that you have as well. Can you kind of talk about the importance of that, and then also just like how you touch on the fact that like, hey, like this is the way that we do it, but not every ranching operation does that, and that's okay. Like your beef is still good. Like
Right.
no matter what you do, you're still feeding your families. Just still buy beef, still eat beef. But hey, this is kind of how we do it, and just like that education aspect you focus on.
Yeah, 100%. So, unfortunately, I think people ascribe to whatever their kind of ethos is, and then they elevate that ethos above all these other ways of doing things because that's the way they do it, and it works for the specific circumstances that they find themselves in. So they're not empathetic to what someone else has to do in order to make the bottom line work or whatever. So when I do interface with some other direct beef sales or direct to consumer beef outfits or individuals, when I see them being a little militant on like you can't get it at the store because of X, Y, and Z health concerns, or you need to buy from me because my family's doing this. Is all that we do. I'm not a sixth generation person with all these assets and dot dot dot. I was like, you're kind of cutting your nose off to spite your face, because all of us are partners in this community, and everybody brings value to the table, and there's plenty of demand for people to cater to those different consumer bases. And so that's bothersome to me when people do that, because it's such a small community. And not to make it adversarial, but there are, quote, adversaries or enemies to our industry. And some of them might be doing it unwittingly because they get information that they take to the bank. And some people just might be doing it in bad faith or malfeasance or maliciously. So I would rather latch arms with the people in my community to dispel those rumors and myths, and work together to advocate for beef and how it's good for the environment, it's good for a healthy lifestyle, and it's good for the economy as well. And so those are kind of what I hang my hat on. So whenever I see I never tell anybody like how to conduct themselves, but I guess as a standard bearer for the direct beef sales kind of community, you won't see me on there demonizing grain-fed outfits, and you won't see me on there demonizing stuff that goes from the packing plant to the grocery store or whatever. And so a lot of times I have some consumers that are very, very health conscious and very, very particular about, I typically don't do any growth hormones, and there's no antibiotics, and there's no animal byproducts fed or anything like that. And so people want that, and I want to be able to provide that for them. But when I'm interfacing with them and they're kind of pulling the strings on how dangerous all that stuff is, I'm actually kind of a voice of reason and being like, the hormone profile for an animal that's been implanted with a growth promotant at slaughter is nearly undetectable. And the differences between grass-fed and grain-fed beef, in my estimation, it's more of a flavor preference opposed to a gigantic difference in beef quality or beef healthiness, health aspects as well. So I mean, I'm not going to do anything to like say don't eat grass fed, go grain finished, and I do that too. I do grain finished if customers want it. But like, if somebody wants something from the cattle industry, we should be able to provide it for them. And and if we give consumers the maximum ability to choose and have choice, they're going to pick what they want. And I think that what's good about being, at least in my circumstances as a direct beef sales guy, I think it's kind of a win-win-win. I feel like I raise a quality product that by and large, they know exactly where it's coming from. It's a single source animal, and I can show them how I raise it. I would definitely get more money from selling it direct to consumer, even though I feel like I'm very competitively priced because I want more people to have access to this kind of food. But it's more money for me as opposed to taking it to the sale barn, and it's most certainly is a cheaper buy for someone that's going to buy bulk quantity of beef opposed to buying it from the grocery store. So like in any business, if everybody is winning, then that's probably a pretty solid thing. So that's kind of my mentality in respect to that.
Yeah, I love how you really hit on the fact that like you use this as an educating opportunity for consumers. You're like, I provide this service so that I can get them in the door. And then once they're in the door, they have trust in me, and I can educate them to be like, hey, actually,
Yeah.
like growth hormones, like this is all that we know about them. And like, even if I did use them, it's not reason for concern for you, and this is why, and things like that. And it's just like a really great opportunity for those ranchers to get in person with the consumers, sit down at the table with them, because you don't always have that opportunity otherwise. If you're in a ranching operation that your operation chooses to take cattle to the sale barn and sell them that way, you don't always get to sit down with consumers from metropolitan areas or just surrounding communities and show them your ranching operation and have those conversations of like, hey, this is agriculture, let me tell you more about it, type of thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of neat that you said that, because this sounds super corny and I'm nobody special, but like for some customers, just for them to talk to the person that's actually managing and touching and taking care of the animals, like that is such a treat to them. Like they're like, wow. I'm not saying I'm like Rip on Yellowstone or anything like that, but I mean, I'm closer to that than them going to the grocery store. So it's just kind of neat for them, and them be able to ask questions and stuff like that. I think it helps connect them to where their food comes from, which I think is a very important endeavor, particularly when we're trying to bridge, in my estimation, artificial divides between urban and rural America. And that, it's not necessarily an anchor point of Halo K, but I am a staunch believer, and I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian or anything like that, but I do feel like a lot of Americans, not necessarily the majority of what they eat, but a large percentage, and for some people more than others, a lot of what they eat is kind of highly palatable, ultra processed foods. And at least in my belief, I don't feel like that leads to the best health outcomes. So I take a lot of pride in providing people kind of a high quality product that's nourishing for them and their families. And, there's one ingredient, beef. I mean, that's it. There's no added anything. There's no multi-syllable kind of things in there that you can't pronounce or don't know what they are. It's just beef. And so I think a lot of my customer base is very sensitive to that, and they try to kind of eat more whole or single ingredient foods. And so I try to cater to that as well. And I personally eat that way myself. I try to minimize consuming those other things. I mean, I cheat on the weekends just like everybody else, but day to day, I mean, I'm pretty much eating single ingredient foods as well.
Yeah, and that's how my family is too. We have seen like my husband and I have seen extreme health benefits from that. And so I can relate to consumers when they're like, hey, this is my desire and this is what I want to do. Can you help me get to this end goal? And then it's like, okay, so secretly, yes, I can absolutely help you get to that end goal. But then I'm also going to use it from a selfish standpoint of agriculture of like, hey, so when you pick up this beef, can you actually just come to the ranch and you can pick it up here? And then they come to the ranch and you're like, hey, do you actually want to see some of the other cattle on feed right now? Or like, do you have any questions? Like, and they can just see it, because consumers, especially urban consumers, get a kick out of it. 90% of them that like are reaching out to you to get that direct beef aren't going to have any malintentions of like, if they're eating it in the first place and reaching out to you in the first place, like they genuinely are curious and care and want to know more. And so it's like, this is a great selfish opportunity to be like, hey, so actually, can I kidnap you for 30 minutes and give you a tour of the ranch? And I'm sure 90% of people eat it up. They love it.
Yeah. And another, I would say maybe 5, maybe 6 of my actual customers are former vegans. And so, which is kind of neat to me. And I'm not here to like, beat the drum on how veganism is dumb. I mean, I'm an American guy, and I want you to be an American person that has the max amount of choice. So you just want to eat vegan and that works for you. That's great. But for these specific customers, at least in their experience, they were having a lot of health problems and chronic disease and inflammation or whatever. And they're some of my biggest proponents. And I'm not that prolific on social media. All my Trailblazer friends and NCBA are always kind of like getting on me on WhatsApp, like, get out there, Max, spread those stuff. I'm like, well, I'm kind of shy, but like my customers sharing their stories and then preparing their stuff. Some of those former vegans are like the most most prolific when it comes to trying to advocate for beef as well. So it's almost like the concentric circles of advocacy. Like I might be in the center, but like I have these other people that are kind of promulgating that message further out as well.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about like building that relationship and building that trustworthiness of like
Uh-oh.
you are creating raving fans that go out and do your marketing for you, and they trust you so much that they want to know more. They want to tell all of their friends about you because they've had great experiences. Can you just talk a little bit more like to those young producers out there or people starting out? Like this is how I've built trust with my consumer base, that they feel like they can come to me and ask these questions, or if they see a mainstream media article, they feel like they can reach out to me and get a direct rancher's opinion on it or something like
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah. So for anybody that's kind of out there that's like starting off in this is, you know, I think I'm what you would consider like an introvert. I'm pretty much prefer to kind of be doing my own program or whatever. But if someone is going to take the time to ask me a question about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, I need to be able to put whatever it is aside that I'm doing and take the time and invest in them so they can get a better understanding of what it is I'm doing. And really it's really good for a couple different reasons. Even if they don't decide to pull the trigger or whatever, they walk away with a little bit more data points than they would have had either way. So that I think that's a pro. And then when people ask me questions, and I've been asked all kinds of questions from, DNA stuff, which I'm not, that's not really my jam. I'm not like a scientific kind of guy, but then, and then I have people ask me a question like, I'd like to get half a cow of ribeyes. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. But when I get this wide disparity of questions, it keeps me sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there might be something that I feel like I can't totally answer the mail on. And so it makes me kind of go back and get a little bit wiser on whatever that really specific question is that they have. So when another consumer asks, I'll be able to answer it right off the top of my head, or at least have a little bit more awareness, because some of them go way out in left field. And so I want to be able to address them and make sure that they feel comfortable with what they're doing, because it is a big investment. One thing that I don't do as a direct beef sales guy is I don't do any individual cuts, and I mean, that's, if you're really trying to quote, make money, that's what you do. But the money part is nice, but like, I just personally, I don't want to be responsible for, inventory and the transactional aspect of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I got to go box up, 4 skirt steaks and 3 ground pat. I just don't want to do that. So I sell quarters, halves, and wholes. And so it is, for people that are getting direct beef sales, that is a more difficult route to go to make a quote sale, because it's a serious commitment, both financially and storage and logistically, for the customer to be like, I'm going to get a side of beef. They got to get I've been on like a phone, like earpods, whatever they're called, AirPods, Apple, whatever thingamajigs, with somebody that's in Lowe's, like looking at a freezer, you know what I mean? Like asking me specs on the freezer, like FaceTiming me. I'm like, yeah, man, that one's good to go. Pull the trigger. So, but like, so that's just my personal thing. I want to be more working on the ranch, in the ranch, opposed to kind of, filling orders. I'm not trying to grow an empire here. This is just something that I do that I enjoy. And I mean, I incrementally grow every year, knock on wood. But like, I just want to kind of keep it small and keep that personal interaction where, most of my customers, it's a first name basis. And I mean, I'm very interactive with them. If they place an order for a whole steer in August, and it's, what's this month, November, I'll send them a little message, on January, be like, hey, Happy New Year. This is what's going on with your steer. And then we get a little bit closer, like, I'm saying, hey, this is what's going on, kind of reinforce how the whole transaction will go down. Then like, I'll text them, hey, your steer was successfully dropped off at this date. The processor will reach out to you with the hanging weight and this is how I'm going to invoice you. And then I'm here to liaison with you to help you go through the cut sheet and all that kind of stuff. So there is a lot of rancher participation / interaction with some of these customers. And everybody wants a little bit more. I mean, some people are like fire and forget. I'll send them an email. They're like, I got it. I'm fine. I was like, okay, roger that. And then other people are like, okay, you have to like reinforce some of the same stuff over and over again. But then, I have some people that have ordered, I don't know, 6 or 7 times from me multiple times a year. And so, they're just like, I mean, they got it. They know the process better than I do. So it's kind of but you have to kind of make that investment of working with them so they feel comfortable about it. And it kind of has to be easy, and this isn't the easiest way for a customer to procure beef, but I think if it's something that they really want, they'll go through a little bit more red tape and steps in order to do it. And you really only got to do it kind of once, and then you have enough to hold you in, depending on what your burn rate is, and then you can just reorder. I have some people that, order, every couple months, and some people that are reliably every year, I want it on this day at a half, and everything in between. So.
Yeah, it's really, really important, I feel like, to just like continue to build that personal relationship with our consumers and stuff like that. And the direct to consumer beef sales, the way that you run your business is literally like a amazing way to do it. You not only are getting on FaceTime calls talking about freezers every once in a while, but when they think of a rancher, hopefully they think of you very first. They're like, this is the person I'm going to go to and ask about this question or stuff like that, especially being so close to Austin, such a like urban place in Texas. It is extremely important to have like kind of that lifeline for these consumers to talk about these questions and things like that. You hit on animal welfare earlier, and that is a big like driver in Halo K's mission and everything like that. You really, really are focused on making sure that the entire lifespan of these animals, you are doing everything you can as their steward. Just from a smaller operations standpoint, what are things that you kind of really focus on that, maybe in larger operations, they're not able to? I feel like everyone in animal agriculture for the most part is really focused on animal welfare, but there are different ways to run operations. And I'd just love to hear kind of like your take on that.
Yeah. So obviously, when I say animal welfare is my number one priority, that is factual, but that's not me saying that it's not other ranchers' priority as well. I'm just very sensitive to it and very cognizant about it. And so I guess I just have this kind of, I'm definitely not like a granola kind of hippie kind of guy, but like I really love animals. I love my dog. I love my barn cats. I like being able to go outside and see wildlife doing their thing. And I want them to do their thing. And I'm not going to do anything to kind of make them feel uncomfortable or unnecessarily frightful of me or abuse them in any which way. And then even more importantly, when you run cattle or livestock, I mean, those animals depend on me. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to put them in some state of duress, either through negligence, either through neglect, or either through me not doing proper stocksmanship, where I'm putting them in a stressful and / painful situation. And so I'm not going to say it's easy for me because I'm a smaller operator, but it's easier, right? The tenets that I try to employ are a lot easier because, I'm working with 15 head here. I'm working with 25 head here. I'm working with 40 head here. It's not these large numbers. I'm not a one-man ranch loading a semi of steers by myself, right? Because that's a little different than me loading up 8 steers to go to the processor, And sometimes, even though I don't use cattle prods or cattle dogs or anything like that, sometimes things that I do should only take about 5 to 10 minutes, and sometimes they take like an hour and a half. And so it's not like most of the tenets of my business, not terribly efficient, but part of what I'm trying to do is just give them a good life. And so the customer knows that that, if Max was the guy that was overseeing this animal, I know this animal was treated well. And I feel like from a karma perspective, it's just the right way to go about kind of raising animals, especially if they're for food.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There's tons of research even behind it, that just like animal welfare's role in just like the meat growing process and just like the marbling process in cattle and everything else like that. There's tons of research that's being published right now about how animal welfare and husbandry practices impact, just like the animal's life outside of like the stress levels and things like that, and truly how, it just impacts what is finished on our table, at dinner time,
Yeah,
and
I
things
kind
like
of look
that.
at it as like if I have if I have happy cattle in a natural environment, it's gonna it's gonna result in tender and flavorful beef.
Yeah.
Now, the scientific algorithmic aspect of that, I have no idea. But like that's my equation: natural
Yeah.
environment, happy animal, flavored tenderful beef, flavorful flavorful tender beef. That's kind of the equation that I use, and so
Hmm.
so far so good. I'm not going to go and ask a land grant university to do a study for little old me on whether or not that's factual or not. But in my heart, I feel like that's the right way to go about it.
Absolutely. You kind of touched on it earlier, but you do a lot of work, with either Texas A&M or just like in general, talking to other farmers and ranchers about, kind of like your business profile, business plans, different things like that. What advice do you have for those farmers and ranchers that are maybe kind of looking into getting into this type of business, or maybe it's a first generation rancher out there that they are ranching adjacent and they're a kid coming back to the family operation and need to provide value in some way, and this is what they want to bring home? What is kind of like your advice to, those people?
Well, I guess it's kind of two bullets, but they're both kind of nested. So number one is I always provide them the maximum amount of encouragement because it's like kind of a huge leap, even if you're going to go small. It's a major shock to your life system, right? Having
Yeah.
to be in charge of these kind of things, whether you're, especially if you're geographically dispersed or live different place from where your animals are, that's even another challenge. But that kind of leads me into my major point is always start small. So it's like, if you're like, I have this many acres, I can run this many head and I can do X, Y, and Z and dot, 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 dot. Well, nothing ever really goes to plan. So what's the harm of starting a little bit small? If you need to
Hmm.
make some tweaks or modifications, you can do it and you're
Yeah.
not putting yourself in a financial or just overall, for lack of a better term, stress pinch where it's like, oh my God, this went so wrong. And, it's like a factor of 3x wrong opposed to 1x wrong. And so if
Hmm.
you make those little minor adjustments year over year, you can kind of remain nimble and kind of move because the best way to learn is through doing. I read a lot of publications and I kind of do a little bit of studying about things that I'm going to, new avenues that I'm going to go. But really, like I started rotational grazing with all electric fence paddocks and poly wire and, all that kind of stuff because I wanted to kind of have more of a regenerative kind of aspect on my primary Bermuda field where a lot of my moms live. And I did all this kind of research, YouTube videos, blah, 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 manual, this, that, and the other. And so I thought I had it all down pat, but man, you don't know anything until you got the reel and you're doing the thing and you wire everything up and you think you're going to be like in surround sound and it's like crickets, nothing. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? You know what I mean? Is you got to troubleshoot all that kind of stuff. So the best way to learn is through doing. I mean, don't go into anything blind, do a little bit of research, but you're never going to you're never going to go into the Major League Baseball on your first day. It's first at plate, boom, grand slam. Like it just doesn't happen. So you just gotta, you gotta be able to roll with the punches and be a little, have the humility to realize that failing, whether it's little fails or gargantuan fails, I've done them both. it's all part of the growth, and it's all part of making you a better cattleman or cattlewoman as you progress through this kind of journey in this career.
Yeah, I think that that is great advice. Like failure is just a part of life in general. Whether you are wanting to start something like this or not, getting really comfortable with failing is probably the quickest way to grow. And just like getting really comfortable with the idea of something not working and just going for it anyway and just risking it for the biscuit.
Yeah.
And you know what? Even if this blows up in our face, at least we can look back at the end of the day and be like, we tried.
Yeah. I'm considering changing my LinkedIn description to expert failure.
That's
So
amazing. I love
a
that.
failure expert, maybe.
Yes, failure expert. I love that. I absolutely do. It's truly one of those things that I feel like as ranchers we understand it that things don't go to plan 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And so it's just no matter what phase of life you're in or what you're trying to start or do, just get comfortable failing because like failure's inevitable and you might as well just be like we're gonna jump off the bridge anyway, and we'll see what
Yeah.
happens
And a
because
lot of
none of
times
us
you
have it all
learn
figured out.
more from your mistakes than you learn from your wins. So
Yeah.
those are good
Yeah.
things.
I literally couldn't agree more. I think I've learned more from the times that I failed than the times that I've succeeded. I could probably count the times that I failed like off the top of my head more than I can like tell you and recount the times that I've succeeded because
Really, yeah.
I've learned more and they've been ingrained in my head more.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. We have talked about so many amazing and awesome things today, Max. I would love to kind of like dive in to your one piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice that you have for the next generation of agriculture.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, the two biggies are, maintain an own, keep a positive mental attitude, and don't get easily discouraged, and start small. I mean, that's basically recounting what I just said. But then I guess another thing that I would like to impart is, unfortunately, you know, getting into agriculture has a lot of barriers to entry. And so it's not easy. In fact, depending on the scope and size of what you want to do, you just can't graduate from college one day and say, I want to manage I want to have enough land to manage 1,000 mama cow herd. Like it's almost like a fiscal impossibility. So I guess I try to kind of approach things from an ag, and then a subset of that, a kind of cattle community where you're willing to help other people and help make them successful so they stick with it and stay with it. So even if you're very small and struggling, uh, it's not a bad idea to take a little bit of your time and your energy to help somebody else that might be also in that same boat as well. And so, I'm really lucky living here in North Texas. And I've said this a couple different times, but the mentality here is people are willing to help anyone and are expecting help from no one. And so it's kind of a great mantra that I'm trying to inculcate into my kids somewhat unsuccessfully, that if you're always willing to help somebody and you try to be as self-reliant as you can, where you don't necessarily need anyone's help, which is never going to happen. You're always going to get in a jam where you're going to need somebody's help. But if you live your life like that, like trying to figure it out and be successful or resilient enough on your own to solve your own problems, and then when somebody finds themselves in a bad way, if you're willing to help them, I think it goes back to that kind of karma circle where you're always going to have someone willing to help you as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the best leadership pieces of advice or lessons that I've learned is as a leader, your job is to literally like learn and then pull people up with you.
Yeah.
And that, like, not only just from a leadership standpoint, but from like a personal, like self satisfaction, self fulfilling standpoint, I get a ton of just like the butterflies and the happy joy and all of the things like that from being able to help people through experiences that I have been through myself. And there's a lot of power with that, and I feel like that's a lesson for this next generation of agriculture is you don't have to gatekeep things. Not
Right.
most of what we're doing nowadays has been done before, or somebody's tried a version of it or things like that. And yeah, always be innovating and trying new things, but don't be afraid to tell people what you're doing too, and to help people along that might have been in a situation that you have been in too. And it also, if you're prepared to teach about something, it makes you learn it in a better way as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that because, like, throughout my whole Army career, I'd say in the first 3 quarters of it, I was all like achievement based. I want to have this and that and this certification and do this and go to this country and have this deployment and, have this skill or whatever. But then when you kind of get to do everything that you wanted to do, there was really I wasn't like getting up in the morning being like, I really want to, go to this meeting or whatever. Where I would get my internal drive was seeing younger men and women that had aspirations like I did when I was at that point in my career or that age. Them putting in the hard work and achieving those goals was what gave me like the maximum amount of satisfaction. So anything that I could do to construct an environment where they could, if they're willing to put in the work, be successful in that endeavor. When they were successful, that was like kind of like the thing that helped me keep my fire before I retired, for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that it is just truly an instrumental thing. And many people in agriculture, like if you just truly root yourself in empowering other people and just truly making this a community, because sometimes being a rancher can be kind of lonely, and
Sure.
it can be one of those situations that if you don't go and put the effort forth yourself to like create relationships or go to the local coffee shop every morning and chit chat with your friends or stuff like that, that it can be lonely. And so putting that effort forth to like being like, hey, I'm going to pour into this next generation, like whether it be my kids or my grandkids or my neighbor's nephew or something like that. Like if people are showing an interest, this is I hate it when people say that this is a dying industry, because it's not. It's just an evolving and changing industry, but it's changing and evolving into something different than what we've known. And I think it's so important that if people show an interest, that as farmers and ranchers and people in agriculture, we take the time to pour into them.
Yeah, I think I love what you just said there. And I mean, as me being kind of like an older fella, kind of curmudgeonly, probably set in my ways a little bit. But I was recently selected for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association Trailblazer cohort for 2024, which is basically kind of younger producers, many of them very savvy in the influencer space as well, just kind of getting together and information sharing and learning kind of facts about the industry, kind of hierarchically down from NCBA to the cohort class, but then also learning from each other. But what was the most refreshing part about me being in that cohort, which was 10 producers from 10 different states, and oddly enough, I was the oldest one in the entire group, and I was the only male. So it was 9 ladies and just me, and they're all young and super smart and better at all this than I am or whatever. But it really gave me a lot of hope, which is not, which is kind of like a corny word to me in some respect, but like I know that the industry is in good hands with like young women like that are just destroying in a positive way everything that they're doing in the industry. I mean, they're just like
Mm-hmm.
incredibly talented at what they're doing, and it runs from seed stock to direct beef sales to farming to nutritionists, PhDs, etc. But then it also, to get corny again, kind of gave me hope for the younger generation. Like I think America is in good hands if we're raising leaders like the ones that were in my trailblazer cohort. So that kind of made me feel good, especially as being like the old weird guy, and then they're all like super great at what they're doing. They were all very gracious to me and have been helpful to me. My major uh, my major pitfall is like I'm awful at like the social media and stuff. Like these gals can do stuff that's just like it would literally take me like a year and a half to do like one of their reels. So they're so great at that, but they've kind of given me some tips or whatever and stuff. But they've just been awesome, and I know that the industry and the country is in good hands with leaders like that.
Yeah,
Include Miss Letty
absolutely.
McKinney, which
Oh yeah, for sure. Letty McKinney is the one that recommended that we have Max on the podcast. And if you guys haven't listened to Letty's episode, go scroll way, way back, like way to the beginning. And Letty was like one of the first 10 that I had on here, and been such an amazing community and everything like that. So Max, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I seriously so appreciate everything that you shared. This conversation was so fun and so rejuvenating, and I needed it on this cloudy Kansas day. It got me fired up and motivated to go out and conquer the rest of the day. And for all of you listeners out there, we will see you next week on another episode of The Next Generation. And make sure you check out the comments down below. We will have all of Max's links. Make sure you go check out his social media, his LinkedIn, Instagram, all the things. We'll have it all linked, and go give him a follow. Give him some support that he's not sucking at social media. He's doing just fine and all the things. And for all you listeners, we'll see y'all next week on another episode. See ya.